Hi there. I'd like to read another excerpt from my new novel, which is called Blink and I'm Gone. Uh, it is meant to say Blink and I'm Gone, but the title is back to front. This is available from Amazon, WH Smith's, and nearly all, if not all, online bookshops. The piece that I'm going to read now is from chapter 6. After I died, I would be with Ben quite often, in the same room, particularly in those first few months when he still lived in the house in Reigate. He slept badly in those first few months. It wasn't just Molly that woke him. He had nightmares of his own to disturb his sleep, images seeping unbidden into his dreams. He'd get up from bed sometimes, quite often in those early days, and go downstairs. He'd sit in the dark, always in the dark. The curtains open at the window so that the moon would cast its cold light, making the room itself look as if it belonged to some other in-between world. I'd be there, sitting in the chair next to him. There we were, the two of us, together, not quite the living or the dead. Ben feeling as if he were almost dead, and I so unwilling to give up the world of the living. He'd lower his head down and rest his forehead on the heel of his hand and moan sometimes, even say my name, and I'd answer, "I'm here, Ben." I'd take his hand, the one that dangled down from his lap, and hold it in mine. It always felt so warm to me, so warm it almost burnt me. We'd sit there for 10 minutes or more sometimes, Ben's hand lying still in mine, burning mine. And then suddenly he'd pull his hand back and look at it, hold it to his mouth and suck it, as if it had become cold, too cold, and he was trying to restore it back to life. On one night like this, in those stark, tormenting early morning hours, not long after my murder, Ben got up and went into the kitchen. He stared down at the black and white tiled floor. His eyes looked vacant, as if he was in a trance. Perhaps he was sleepwalking. There was no stain on the tiles that would have been apparent ordinarily, but I knew that he was seeing it. A pale blush of red on the tiles that were white, the stain of my blood. He went out of the back door, down the long lawn that was our back garden, past the rotary washing line, the recently dug vegetable plot, where nothing yet was growing except weeds, down to the shed. He kept an axe there for chopping wood for the wood-burning stove that we'd had installed. He picked it up now, and like a man possessed, carried it back up the garden and into the kitchen. He planted his feet firmly and lifted the axe high and brought it down upon the tiles where my head would have lain in its bath of blood. He swung the axe again and again until long dark cracks appeared on the tiles, fragmenting the bloodstain he could see in his head. Ben, what is it? What on earth are you doing?" Sylvia was there in the doorway, her limbs mottled and pudgy beyond the confines of a thin cotton nightie. He lifted the axe up high again, poised for another strike, but she was there at his side, her hand on his shoulder. I was there at his other side, my cold hands pulling down his arms, although I doubt that he could feel me there. The resistance in his arm seemed to drain away. Got to get rid of those tiles, got to get rid of the bloodstain. He shook his head as if trying to shake away the image of the stain. Light came back into his eyes. If he had been sleepwalking, he was waking up now. My mother's warm hands and my cold ones covered Ben's hands. He lowered the axe to the floor and his clenched hands released. The axe clattered onto the broken tiles. Ben looked round, realised where he was, what he had been doing. He buried his face in my mother's hot, flushed neck and sobbed, gulping noisy and painful breaths, as if something was being torn out of him. "It's all right, Ben. It's going to be all right," Sylvia said. She awkwardly patted the back of his head, not quite knowing what to do with this moment, men's grief and her own. Always a prickly area for my mother to navigate. If she gave in to her own grief, and she feared she'd be overwhelmed, she couldn't allow that to happen, not whilst there were others who needed her.